right, DNA. Okay, I talked about how science doesn't know really what they're dealing with DNA. This is a point I want to bring together because we talked about fire letters in one part of one workshop, and then we talked about other aspects of DNA in another. This will bring it together a little bit of how these two things work together. Okay, the scalar wave programs. Now we learned up here that DNA are actually the observable portions, chemical translations, of scalar wave programs that exist in the morphogenetic field. Okay? Scalar wave programs that are held within the DNA imprint, these create the diversity of form. Different programs of scalar waves create different DNA in the manifest levels, which creates different biologies. Okay? These programs, though, the scalar wave part of the DNA, the part below the part they're seeing, we call them fire letters. That's an ancient term that was used in Enochian teachings. And in the Hebrew teachings, they talked about fire letters. They were talking about the scalar wave patterns that, when activated within the DNA, allowed the body to turn to light. It allowed particle and antiparticle to fuse, to turn into fire, and go to the next octave. They were talking about the secret mechanics, and they were always trying, the Hebrews especially knew this process existed, even with all the repression of information our histories have been about. They knew there was a sequence to fire letters, which are represented in the shapes of the Hebrew alphabet, some of them. They knew there was a sequence that held the secret to higher evolution, held the secret to opening the relationship between man and God. They knew there was a secret to ascension, and it was in the fire letters. They're right. They didn't take it as far as fire letters are scalar wave grids that affect other scalar wave grids of your DNA, that if you do it this way, it can, yes, make you turn into light and go up to the next octave. They didn't take it that far. Once upon a time they did. This information was taught before. They didn't use the term DNA. They didn't need it. That was just another chemical thing that happens as a result of the real stuff underneath. So there were terms in other languages that were applied to the core templates. They were applied to the genetic imprint below the DNA. But it helps to understand, if we want to understand this process of evolution, and if we want to understand what indigos are, we need to understand a little bit about how evolution works in general within our bodies, because it works different with them. Okay? We simply need to understand that we can look at our DNA, instead of just identifying it as the chemical components of gene code that science uses now. Look at it as, yes, it's that. But it is also programs of scalar waves that are called fire letters. The DNA is a sequence, several sequences, of scalar wave programs run together. They create flash line sequences that create the templates upon which your matter particles are built. Okay? It is a science. Simply expanding our concept of DNA into the concept of sequences of fire letters upon which the chemical translations manifest will begin to help us understand the process of biological transmutation, which was our original imprint. We were not meant to die. If you understand how to activate DNA, and you can fix the mess that's been done to our DNA, death was not originally part of the human condition. Transmutation was the way to get out of here. You didn't leave a body behind. You didn't have to. The bodies didn't get sick because you knew the mechanisms by which they stayed healthy. That's all been taken away from us because of the way our history unfolded. The indigos are bringing back our heritage. They're bringing back the knowledge. And I know this, and I know it intimately, because I'm one of them. I'm one of the indigos. There's 3 types we'll talk about later. I'm a type 1. And I'm not the only one. There's 350 like me right now. And there's like 2,500,000 of type 3. So there's a lot of indigos here already. Okay? When I speak about indigos, I'm not speaking about somebody told me something about indigos and I'm passing on to you. I know what it's like to be raised in the indigo body here. I know what the indigo body means and what the gene code is doing. So I'm speaking from the heart as well as the mind when I talk about this stuff. We need to understand how our DNA functions. If we're going to understand how the DNA of the indigos differs from that of human, why they are considered, even though they birthed through human bodies, why, through human parents, why they are considered literally a hybrid ET race. There is a distinct difference in their gene code. And I've done diagrams in these chart packs to show you that difference, because it becomes really apparent when you have the spatial relationships in the visual diagrams. So we'll see that in a little bit. Now, let's see. Okay, we need to also, if we're going to understand the whole process, our ascension process, to understand indigos, we need to understand our ascension process. We've been through these teachings in parts in other workshops. This is like a quick roundup, and especially if anybody that hasn't been to the other workshops, this is the crash course in DNA ascension mechanics. So you get that by the wayside as you learn about indigos. All right, you have biology and consciousness, which are matter and spirit, are intimately intertwined. They're composed of the same substance. This is what science doesn't get either. Consciousness, our bodies, matter particles, are made of units of consciousness. That is the only substance that really exists in the universe. Consciousness is a substance. It can be quantified. It can be grouped. It can be structured. It is not a byproduct of matter particles interrelating with each other. It is not a byproduct of brain chemicals firing in certain sequences that give you the ability to think you're alive. It starts first. Matter, the experience of matter, is built on a core of consciousness. Consciousness is energy, and at least science acknowledges that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It just changes form. Consciousness cannot be created or destroyed. It just changes form. This is what the whole thing is about. Energy is consciousness, and consciousness is energy. Science knows energy's always existed. They can't figure out where before energy what was there. There was no before energy, or there would be not now. It gets into those really riddle-like questions: which came first, chicken or the egg? Who knows? Because somehow they just always existed, and are representations of each other at different phases. So anyway, if we acknowledge that biology and consciousness are composed of the same substance, we begin to realize this is a part of our mind. We begin to realize that the higher parts of ourselves we don't see are part of our body. We have 15-dimensional anatomy that we're not taught about in health class. We need to be taught about this stuff. I mean, we might learn how to brush our teeth and comb our hair and exercise and do all those good things to keep your physical matter body healthy. But it's like knowing you have a thumb and not realizing you have a hand, an arm, and a whole body with a head and a brain to go with it. This is what's happening and what we're taught about our bodies. We have a 15-dimensional identity structure, which is a 15-dimensional biological structure with 5 harmonics of matter density. We need to learn this if we're going to help indigos. Because the awakening process, the process by which a soul who comes in here and then has the ability to awaken, to remember who it was before so it can remember what it came to do, requires a knowledge of the 15-dimensional identity. You come in here, the gene code shuts down. Those levels of consciousness that were in the higher fields block out. The gene code blocks them out. If you don't have the mechanics here available, say, okay, when that happens, here's how you fix it. Here's how you open up the gene code to bring the rest of you back in. You just stay that way. Indigos are going to stay lost. And that will be a real shame if that happens. Because a lot of them are just going to backfire, and they're going to be like firecrackers holding too much energy, and they're just going to explode. Others are just going to fade and just drop the bodies and leave if they can't awaken. A lot of them go into drugs in the teens because it numbs them. They feel things that they can't put words on yet, and they don't have a belief framework to understand themselves yet. They try to think they're normal. After a while, they realize they differ. They realize they pick up on things that their peers are not picking up on. They realize that all these competitive sports in school, indigos tend to go, how archaic. It's like, the old days when they fed people to the lions for fun. Indigos tend to carry a consciousness with them, even if they can't verbalize it, of aversion to a lot of these things. Type 3s can be competitive, but most of them are just beyond that kind of stuff. And they feel different, but they don't have a framework to understand why they're different or what they're supposed to do with that fact. It gets to be very painful, not to mention the fact that they're so sensitive to electromagnetic frequency that standing by Xerox machines or being in trains that are electrical trains or any of these things that normal people just don't have a problem with affects them. I used to ride, when I'd ride in a car, the vibration of the motor of the engine would make me physically sick. And it would take me 2 hours of recalibrating my fields and just curling up in a ball and bringing my energy back in to neutralize what simply the vibration from car engines would do. Imagine what indigos living under high-power wires are experiencing. Their bodies go into mutation. They get cancers more easily from it. These children are sensitive to all sorts of things that average people aren't. We'll cover some of that as we get into understand more of who they are. The most important thing I want to get across first is who they are and how that can be possible. By showing you the frameworks of DNA, of multidimensionality, and reminding you how those pieces fit together. That is saying, what I'm going to say next, this is how it's possible. So before I say what I want to say about the indigos, and you go, oh yeah, right, you know, I've already given you a framework to understand where that can be a very rational choice to believe. So that's why I do it this way. I try to break the information down in a way that your logical mind, that just like everybody's logical mind here has been programmed in a certain way by society, that, well, if this, and this aren't met, then it's not real to me. I won't listen. I want people to listen about the indigos and understand who they are. So I have to give the framework. So you can say, well, I don't know if I believe it yet, but I see how it could be possible. If she's right about dimensional structure and DNA and all that stuff, it really could be happening, couldn't it? You know? So that's the level of opening that I want to make in the consciousness. The people in this room are great because most of the people have been through workshops and they've been already familiar with the paradigm. This is the way, if you want to get across to other people, particularly if you happen to be in the psychology area, in the psychology fields or anything like that, or in medical fields, you need to realize you can't just dump it on people because they're going to say, you're absolutely nuts, and if you happen to be in the professional community and let it slip, you're going to be blacklisted big time. You know, they will harass you. You know, if you push forward with movements about it, they will probably try to suspend your licenses and really, you know, mess with you. The government organizations and stuff that control things. This has to be very quietly, an understanding that has to be very quietly and gently moved in to the masses of our race. And it's only going to touch the most intelligent levels of our race who are willing to come out from the old programming and say, you know, maybe it isn't the way we were taught. They're willing to learn something new. But everybody can learn to do this. If you realize, if you explain a little about dimensional structure to somebody, if you're talking to your scientist colleagues or friends like that, say, okay, this is how dimensions work together. Where did you hear that? You know what I mean? Well, some person's teaching it, but anyway, you know, don't get into me or who I am. Or it doesn't matter. What matters is, oh, I learned it anyway. Let's get to the point. This is an interesting way of looking at things, don't you think? And I've heard that those children that they're having such problems with, actually, it's about this for them. You're showing them a paradigm in a non-threatening way. You're not saying you have to believe this where they say, you're saying this and I'm saying the opposite. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. That gets nowhere. You have to open up the awareness in people. And the people who are getting this information first are the ones who will be able to go out into the world and begin to say, okay, I know something that they don't know and that they're not going to want to know. You know? So I have to gently filter this information in the right places, the right individual. There's an opening to metaphysics there. Let's take it that way. We need to spread the awareness of indigos if we want things to work out well over the next 20 years, because they're going to get worse and worse and worse. Indigos are here not only to help themselves grow, to help us grow. They're here for the planet, because there's things happening here that if they weren't here, we wouldn't be here by the end of 2017. Okay, we'll get into that later too. Okay, let's see. Let's see what DNA. Okay, I want to say one more thing about the 5-letter sequences that are really the core of the DNA imprint. Remember, 5-letter sequences are scalar patterns. The manifest chemical components of the DNA are the chemical translations of those 5 letters, or at least the ones they're able to perceive with our equipment of identification. There's a whole interdimensional spectrum of DNA chemical translation they're not able to see yet. Anyway, so we have the 5-letter sequences of each DNA strand correspond to each dimensional band. Each dimensional band in that whole structure, morphogenetic structure, 15 dimensions, each dimensional band is a scalar grid, and it has a specific amount of scalar patterns. Each dimension has 12 subfrequency bands, which means it has 12 flashline sequences that we talked about before. Okay? These flashline sequences are really what the DNA is, the scalar patterns of the DNA. The flyer letters are the flashline sequences. So not only do our DNA and do we have fire letters that form our morphogenetic structure, the whole universe is composed of these. The whole dimensional structure itself, the progression from consciousness to matter and back again, there are specific structures of scalar waves that are fire letters. Each dimensional band has a certain configuration of flashline sequences, fire letter sequences. When a form is built up to become manifest and to come down in through the matter densities down into here, it will take on, in its pure form, the arrangements or flashline sequences of each level of the dimensions. So there will be a part of you in your individuated flashline pattern that adopts the flashline patterns of D1, of D2, of D3, of D4, all the way up the 15-dimensional scale. This is reflected in your DNA fire letters. Your DNA fire letters are supposed to be, when they're operating properly, a small version replica of the fire letters of each dimensional band. And by progressively bringing them into activation where they begin to flash on and off, you progressively expand your consciousness and de-densify your matter. This was the process as it originally worked until they started pulling things out of the flash line sequences and twisting the fire letters. Distorting your fire letters is distorting your DNA. And that's what happened to our race. Is one of the reasons the Indigos are back. Okay, we can go past that one now. Okay. Now, the Diamond Sun 12-strand DNA matrix. People who have been in the workshops before understand that I've talked about the original human imprint being a 12, not a 2-strand DNA pattern. This was the original design. There is an original design, which means somebody designed it. The DNA imprint for the human form. What we have right now are 3 active strands. That's all. We get 3-dimensional consciousness because we have 3 strands activated, which allows only 3 dimensions of frequency, scalar wave patterns, to translate through the hologram into manifestation. Originally, we were supposed to have 12 strands. Now, the strands don't look like this. This is a diagram that I use to show relationships of strands to each other. And to show you, there's other diagrams that in other courses on the DNA that I get more into, I show you what's contained, the basic codes contained in each strand. So this is a diagram. This is not how, if you look real close down into your morph structure, it's going to look like that. There are geometrical relationships of these scalar wave grids that have very specific, what they call geomancies, or angles of interrelationship. This is not those. This is simply a way to show you strand content, strand amount, so you can compare what yours was supposed to be when you were originally designed as being a human consciousness, what it is now, what it needs to grow back into being, so you can reclaim your ascension codes, which are your appropriate fire letter sequences that correspond directly to the dimensional bands. This is what our evolution is about here, even without the Indigos. This is what we have been trying to accomplish all along down here on planet Earth, was to try to rebuild our original imprint because it was shattered at one point. It's a morphogenetic field that had 12 primary fire letter sequences, flashing on and off sequences. Some of those frequencies were completely pulled out. The flashline sequences just didn't exist anymore, which threw off the whole calibration of how consciousness related to itself. This is DNA mutation. Mutation of fire letters, distortion of fire letters, distortion of scalar wave patterns translates into DNA mutation, translates into perceptual distortion. We have been living for 200,000 years under perceptual distortion caused by DNA mutation. We have been trying to re-evolve back into the 12-strand DNA pattern, which means each one of these strands, each line here represents a strand. That represents a flash line sequence, a fire letter sequence, that corresponds to one dimension, that corresponds to one dimension of your consciousness. 12 strands implied 12 dimensions of consciousness embodied in a human form, which is an avatar identity that's capable of moving its vibrational rate where it wants to, appearing and disappearing at will, and manifesting in 4 harmonics of matter density wherever it chooses. That was our original potential. We have the ability to reverse mutate that, and I've done workshops on that, and that's what our programs are about. I have the Tangible Structure of the Soul program here, which is the beginning. Cathara Healing is the second level. We're learning to reverse mutate the mess that our DNAs turn into. If we realize our consciousness that we use to, if we think a thought, we are making a waveform. If we hold an image in our mind, we're not just imagining things, as psychology would love to try to get us to believe. We are creators created in the image of the original creator, which simply would think, and thinking, by the process of thinking and cognating, would create many morphogenetic fields within itself. We do this. Every time we think a thought, we're creating a thing in scalar form. We're creating a template that something will manifest upon. If we begin to understand this, and we begin to understand, too, that our DNA is what? It's a scalar pattern. They're the same substance. Waves affect waves. The scalar patterns we put here and direct into the DNA will affect the DNA. You can reverse mutate. You don't need scientists and laboratories and fancy equipment to do this. All you need is to know how to use the equipment you came in with, your mind-body-spirit system. And this is what we teach, how to begin the process of repairing this DNA so we can get our higher levels of consciousness back. So all this stuff they talk about that seems so far out to many people becomes common knowledge, because on your higher dimensional levels of identity, you already know this. You don't need me to teach you there because you already remember. Here we just forgot because the DNA code blocked it. So we're in a process of remembering, not creating something that doesn't exist. We're just remembering what was always ours, which was the 12-strand heritage. It's important to realize this heritage because if we want to understand indigos, we're going to be able to start seeing, with understanding this heritage, how they differ from the basic human imprint in a good way. But it's kind of mind-blowing. If you consider right now, we're working on 3 strands of activation. We're actually, I think, what's the next one there? I want to show the root race chart. That's a ways up, huh? There we go. Okay. Now, we're aiming for, our evolutionary objective is the 12-strand pattern. Okay? We're on 3-strand right now. This is the overall pattern that we have been involved with for many millennia. The 12 tribes and the earth seedings. We're a part of a huge, huge, long-term evolutionary experiment that has been ongoing for many, many thousands of years. This is the 3rd time this race, our race, was seeded on this planet. It got wiped out the other 2 times. And that some of that history is in the Amenti, Voyages Amenti book. Much more of it is coming in the new books, if I ever get time to write them, because more of it, I have been accessing more. But we need to understand something. There's a pattern in a design that's absolutely beautiful to the evolution of a race. Imagine you're a very high being up there beyond matter density. You're going to create a race. You're a creator god. Not the big god, but a smaller god. We're all faces of God. We all have creative ability. So you're going to create a race of beings. This beautifully designed, eloquent plan was created by which would have 12 tribes, 7 root races, and 5 cloister races. The root races would be a period of time on the planet where one type of being that had one of the strands, one of the flash line sequences, moving the consciousness through this certain time period, would create evolution of one DNA strand. That's what each root race did. And to get here, it implies you have incarnations in the earlier root races, or you wouldn't have 3 strands. The way you got to be a 3-strand being was to have evolved first through the earlier root races, which are Polarians and Hibernians. They are actually an etheric matter race that started on harmonic 3 of Earth, which is called Gaia. The physical root races started to come in down through here with the Lumians. All right. They were evolving strand 2. In our seeding, these already got wiped out. We're back up here. They reseeded them again. These 2 were all right. They reseeded from number 3, root race 3, Lemurians. They were working on evolving strand 2. So everybody in this room and everybody on the planet, to be here in a strand 3 body implies you have Lemurian incarnations in your cellular memory that gave you the flash line sequences and fire letter sequences. Associate it with that time period. Associate it with strand 2. Associate it with the 2nd dimensional frequency bands. Okay? These were here 73,000 years ago. That's when they got seeded here. Now, with each root race, there was a cloister race that came in with the purpose of 2 things. First, the cloister race would come in first and birth through the root race potential. The cloister race was a bigger flashline sequence DNA. It had more strands. And out of that, smaller versions would come to evolve the particular strands of the lower parts. So each root race had a cloister race affiliation. 75,000 years ago, the first race to come in physical were called the Urantrians. They had in their flashline sequence of birth strand 2 plus 7 through 12. Now notice with all the cloister races, they have whatever the single strand is that their root race went with, but they also have strand 7 through 12. They held the potential of the 12-strand pattern, anchored it here into the race morph field, so it would be a potential for the races. Because if they just came in with one strand, they would have stayed one strand. You needed to have a race that would hold these higher potentials while the lower potentials were evolved and the strands were built up to meet them. The process and design of our evolution is literally passing through these thousands and thousands of years of root and cloister race cycles to progressively and very slowly rebuild the flashline sequences of our 12-strand DNA pattern. It didn't have to be that slow, but it was an agreement made by stellar races that would be stretched out over many thousands of years. Because the last time we were up there, this race, we got a little full of ourselves and created some real messes. So there are beings in the higher harmonics that don't want to hear anything about giving humans the key to the kingdom again. Not anytime soon. They want to make sure when we evolve down here, we get it this time, and we learn compassion, and we learn to use our power with wisdom, because we almost blew a planet up when our race was in the higher harmonics. That's how we got down here in the first place. So there's a lot of politics going on in the higher harmonics with the beings who reside there as far as how much humans are going to be allowed to know. When it was finally agreed that they'd even let us re-evolve to get our consciousness back out of being stuck down in this harmonic in fragmented form, they agreed to allow the Mente rescue mission to take place. We fragmented from harmonic 2 the consciousness of the race that was the human race there. Fragmented. Literally, its morphogenetic field blew apart, and little fragments of consciousness just blended in with the dimensional frequency bands down here. And they would have stayed as undifferentiated units of consciousness if the original imprint of their morphogenetic template was not re-entered down here so they could start to build back up into it. It was building our consciousness back up in this harmonic to get back to what we were before we blew ourselves apart. It's hard to understand from our scientific perspective that doesn't even like to acknowledge anything above D3. But it was a very grand evolutionary plan of races over long periods of time to give us back our original potential. At this point, we are here. And when I speak about Aryan race, every one of the root races has all of the colors. Okay, so Aryans are not just white. You know, there are black Aryans, there are red-skinned Aryans. They're basically red, white, black, brown, and yellow were the basic skin categorizations, and there's all sorts of combinations of all of those. So each one of the root races had a predominant cloister race that had a predominant one of those colors, but then they would have all of the other colors in each race. So every race color was represented equally in all of the root and cloister races. Now, we've managed to evolve through our Lemurian period. The next one was to evolve strand number 3 in the fourth root race cycle. That began with the Branoa cloister. Now, I was a member of this. I had an incarnation in that period, a couple of them in that period, so I remember certain things from that period. Last time they were here was 72,000 years ago. Before that, before they got wiped out the first time, they were here 3 million years ago. These are ancient races we're talking about here. Okay? Before that, I believe they came in, no, we didn't get that, yeah, we got that far, 12 million years ago. So when we talk about the Branoa race, which are actually related more closely than any of the other cloisters except the Melchizedeks to the Indigos, we're talking about ancient races of beings here. This is an ancient genetic imprint. So right now, we've managed to get to the point where we're of the Aryan fifth root race cycle. Most of the people on the planet, and probably few of the people in this room, are of the Aryan root race. Evolving strand 4, just coming into opening up fourth dimensional frequencies into your awareness, just beginning to acknowledge the astral level of existence, just beginning to have perceptions associated with fourth dimensional consciousness. That's where most people are at in our present times. Most people in this room are probably more so in through here or here, where you're working on fourth through fifth strand development, because the information that I'm carrying comes in on a minimum of fifth dimensional frequency at this point. People who can't hold fifth dimensional frequency in their consciousness, they don't have the flashline sequence receptors for it, will not be drawn to this information. They can't process it. They won't be able to grasp it, and that's okay. So the people who are drawn here, sitting in these rooms, learning this stuff, it implies that you have a gene code that has some of the higher strand content to some degree, because that's drawing you in to receive information that's coming in on these frequencies. But most of us, most of the people on the planet walking around out there in Sleepersville, are of the Aryan race, just beginning strand 4 activation. When we see that, and then later we're going to see what the Indigos are, there's a striking difference here. Okay. All right, these guys, the Aryans, started about 65,000 years ago. They came out of the Haibiru cloister. Now, the Haibiru is not the Hebrew. They're different. They're two different race strains, interrelated, but different. Okay. The Haibirus were working on strand 4 plus 7 through 12. They were here about 68,000 years ago. When we look at our race lines here, and I can go right down to telling you, as far as races that exist on the planet now, where they came out of, what matrix they came out of. I'm not going to do that, because right now the consciousness on this planet would take that information and use it to hate each other more. They would use it to divide themselves and to point fingers, I'm better than you are, and to try to dominate each other. So there's a level where I won't plug in the final plugs to tell you, what this race is, what that race is, what that race is. But I will mention what the Hebrews are, because actually all of our seeding has to do with the Hebrews that came from the race cycles before, when everybody got destroyed. Okay? We've had Hebrew-Egyptian lines. This is where all of these root races and all these cloister races came out of in this third seeding, out of the Urtites 800,000 years ago. That's when this whole third seeding process came into being. Back down here in seed number 2, which was like from 3,700,000 years ago to about 848,800 years ago, that's when we tried this before. So, same root races, same cloister races. Didn't get very far. But some of the individuals from the cloister races here survived. And they were taken to other planetary systems. Some were taken to inner Earth systems. We got the Hebrew strains in through here, right at the end. It was an attempt to save the declining races here, because they were getting into genetic mutation through Anunnaki visiting and messing with the gene code. Is a mixed cloister race. We have the Hybiru, which is the fifth cloister that goes with the Aryan root race. And up above that, we have the Melchizedek races. And you'll see this word in the New Age movement a lot these days. Melchizedek this, Melchizedek this. What in the world is Melchizedek? In its truth, it meant many things, but one of them was it's a literal cloister race of beings. And they are starting to enter here now. They're starting to enter their birthing cycles. But these are even small compared to what the Indigos are. The Melchizedeks are very advanced. They come in with strand 5 in their birth imprint. And their life cycle is about activating strand 5. Really, that's a future time. The Muvarian root race would be in the future from where we are. So when we have the Melchizedeks birthing in, they're beginning the next wave of evolution that would normally come through the Muvarians. When we move from strand 4 into 5 activation, probably several 100,000 years in the future. Indigos are even beyond this. You'll love this when you get beyond it. But you need to understand this basic structure to see, okay, who's at what stage of evolution? Each one of these races represent a phase or stage of evolution evolving back up toward the 12-strand pattern and beyond. Okay, so right now we have some Melchizedeks coming in. Many of the people drawn to this material, because it comes in on a D5 frequency, which goes with the 5th strand. They have the 5th strand, which means they have a receptor to pull in 5th dimensional frequency, which means that they can respond to information that comes in on this frequency. So most people that respond to this at all have something to do with Melchizedek gene code in them. You're probably part of a cloister race, just to be in this room, this cloister. But if you're indigo, you're even more than that. Okay, I'm a Melchizedek, but I'm an indigo Melchizedek, and we'll get into the differences later. Okay, we'll get into this, too, when we're understanding indigos. The Uniseti cloister, that's supposed to go with the one I can't even pronounce, Uinjuki 7th root race, that's evolving strand 6. Remember, we're down here right now. Okay, evolving strand 6. They're a future race, in harmonic 2, where Earth there is called Tara. Okay? They're many, many, many thousands of years in the future before our race would naturally evolve into that imprint in its original design. The indigos come in with strand 6 activated. People here come in with strand 3 activated. Most people. They birth in with the 3rd strand activated. They spend the process of this life and many others afterwards, possibly until they're done, activating strand 4. Then they birth into this race and they do strand 5. Then they come into strand 6 activation. It's a completely different race by then. It's a whole different root race. It's a whole different race cycle. It's a future race cycle. The indigos, one of the special features is that they're born with 6-strand activation. When you go into the dimensional scale, this is why they're called indigos. It's a New Age term that was coined by people who can see auric fields, who notice that they tend to have a real concentration of the blue frequency spectrum in their auric fields, more than average. There's a reason for that. The 6-dimensional frequencies that go with the 6th strand have what's called a capstone color. Now, every dimension has a capstone color, which is its primary wave spectra. If we remember, the color is a wave spectra, a wave pattern. Every dimension has a capstone, which is the primary wave pattern. Then it has all these little wave patterns inside of it that are the color spectrums within it. Blue, indigo, goes with, we have blue on strand 5, indigo on strand 6, and then goes into violet in strand 7. Dimension 7 goes with violet Dimension 6 goes with indigo. That's where they get indigo. They didn't even realize this. They were reading the auric fields and saying, I see this color. It wasn't known yet about the design of the DNA evolution, so nobody knew yet to look for what does that mean with the strands. But it's kind of interesting that it translates right into that. Strand 6, the capstone color, is indigo. They're born with strand 6 activated and strand 5 activated. Most Aryans are born with 3 activated and the imprint for strand 4. They don't even have the imprint for strand 5, 6, or 7 through 12. If you happen to be born a cloister, now these are mostly out of here by now. It's like a race cycle that phased out and moved into the next level, into the Aryan root race. Now we're moving into the Melchizedeks coming in. These are very special individuals. They have higher consciousness abilities because they are born with the strand 4 activated most of the time and the imprint for strand 5, which compared to the Aryans is much advanced. Compared to the Hybiru, it was advanced. So it's a progressive advancement of strand activation and integration of consciousness, which creates genetic evolution of the race while simultaneously creating consciousness evolution of the race. It's called biospiritual evolution. That's the process we're all involved in, whether we realize it or not. When we get into beings up here, they're not even supposed to be here right now. They're beings from future race cycles. The consciousness of those beings has many more flashline sequences in it than ours do, many more scalar grids, which means more awareness. They have access to more of their higher dimensional identity than we do, and they have this from birth. This can be a gift, and it can also be a curse. And the way our society is structured right now, to the indigos, it's a curse. It makes it almost intolerable to be here for some of them. Now, they're even more than that. This is just the beginning, 6-strand activation. It's much more than that. When we get into who are these consciousnesses coming in and where are they coming from, that's when it gets amazing. That's when we learn something that has not been clearly put here for many thousands of years, which is, where did we come from? What is our lineup of consciousness? What races did we come down through the matter densities from? Okay? Obviously, the fact that we're in physical matter implies that once upon a time we were part of some race that had semi-physical matter, semi-etheric matter, and then a race above that that had etheric matter. There are races of beings, not just individual parts of yourself, but individual parts of races that went all the way up the dimensional scale. There's a stellar heritage here that has been totally banned from our history books by the Anunnaki primarily, because they wanted to be able to manipulate from behind the scenes like little humans down in a petri dish. We're the little sheep to play with, and just make sure they don't know too much, because they might rebel and decide they don't want to play, your God and we're subservient anymore. The information that we're giving here on the DNA, on who we are, is essential to understanding who indigos are, because you can see where they differ, but it's also a revelation for us. It's our chance to grab this information and run, to get out of the mind control, distorted history nonsense we have been taught for years and centuries and thousands of years, to say, wait a minute, there's a part of me that remembers some of this. I did come from somewhere higher, and this is the way it works. That's when you throw out the history books and say, all right, let me remember how it works. Let me remember how to reclaim this. Let me remember how to do cellular transmutation, for one. That would be really great. I don't have to incarnate down here in the densities anymore. Yes. Yeah, you'll start to remember. We got to realize we're part of a huge evolution program. And the only reason we don't know this is because when we were in our very small, just beginning to evolve down here days, each time we were thrown down here with the lower strands, the ones who were controlling this design, some of them decided they weren't going to let us in on the secret. Others decided they were going to take this original design and do something completely different with it and hijack it. There are beings in Harmonic 2 that have 11th dimensional consciousness. They have the ability to have 11 strands of DNA. Do not want humans to get back to being 12-strand DNA. Why? We'll have a whole other dimension of consciousness beyond their own. We'll have stronger genetic capacity than their own, and we will be more powerful, aware, and intelligent than they are. We will be a force to contend with, because we will realize at that point what they did to the evolutionary cycles of our race here. And they're very nervous that we may be very upset when they find out how, by being so helpful, they mutated this race, where it took many more thousands of years to move through this design than it was supposed to. It was not supposed to take all these millions of years to get the 12-strand pattern back. That happened because continually races that did not want this race to evolve back into what it was made sure they interrupted the evolutionary cycles, or hijacked it, or mutated it, or took it this way, or took it that way, just so it doesn't go back to the 12-strand pattern. Many of our religious teachings were purposely seated there to put us in subservience to some God figure, not teach us the ascension mechanics at all, and to make sure we never realized that we were embodiments of Creator. We didn't need middlemen. We have power in the fact that we are part of Creator, just like those higher beings that like to play God are. They didn't want us to know this. Our race has been mutated repeatedly. This is one of the reasons why the Indigos are back. Because at this point, if it doesn't get changed, if some intervention isn't done, our gene code is going to go right down the tubes, and we will completely lose as a race this capacity. It will be mutated out of the potentialities down here, and we'd have to reseed the whole thing all over again. The ones in higher harmonics who have assisted us in getting this far are very tired too. They're tired of it getting to a certain level and collapsing again. It's like trying to build a snow fort, and every time you get to the roof it falls in, and you have to start over. After a while you say, maybe on to another project. You give up. They don't want to give up. The ones who are really our elder races, what we came out of, they don't want to give up on our evolution here. But if they let it get any further down, if it goes any further down, it's going to be a whole other race. This race that we're turning into now, by the mutations we carry and by amplifying those, will completely block out our ability to reclaim the 12-strand pattern. We will become something that was not particularly foreseen or intended, a different type of consciousness that is three-dimensional, stuck in three-dimensional phase lock, will always be finite until it burns itself out and turns back into dust, dust into dust. If we evolve to the 12-strand pattern, we will be able to progressively accrete or bring to ourselves the higher levels of consciousness, move out of incarnation cycles in harmonic 1 up into harmonic 2, then up into harmonic 3, and move our way out of density while retaining our memory and our sentient identity. If you take that potential away and you cut something off at the 3rd strand, what you're doing is making it so they can get up to the 3rd dimension, 3rd-dimensional consciousness. At that point, the body shuts down and dies. The consciousness leaves the body, goes up into the higher bands without a body for a little while, has to find another body, create another body down here, and it reincarnates again, over and over and over, until eventually the amount of consciousness that was held within that original 3-dimensional part of the consciousness gets smaller and smaller and smaller. You're using up energy, and you've cut off the supply, the perpetual supply that comes from direct connection to source through the higher identities. When that happens, gene codes digress. And when that happens, consciousness gets to the point where it can't hold a human pattern. It can't incarnate anymore into a human form. So it goes backward instead of forward into evolution. It goes into de-evolution, back into eventually space dust, or units of consciousness within the lower 3-dimensional fields that will become used to manufacture other constructs of consciousness. You can always be you're always part of God, and you can do it in 2 ways. Being sentient, fully aware of who you were, who you are now, and your whole identity and consciousness are intact, or you can simply not be self-aware at all and exist within God as part of the substance that God creates with. It's up to us whether we want to evolve up into cognition or simply be space dust to be used for other beings who have cognition that are creating things. We're always part of it. We're always part of the universe. This is always part of it. This has been our plan. This has been what we have been denied for very, very long. I'm going to put one more out before we go. What we got there? All right, we'll just go back to this. I'm getting told I need a break here. Are you guys ready for yeah? All right, am I throwing too much at you?
Really hydrated today.
Yeah, we didn't even find out what indigos really are yet. Yeah. Once you find out what it means as far as identity, it's mind-blowing. It really is. It's. I'm very relieved because it took me till I was 35 to finally understand what the hell I was. Okay, to put it bluntly, I knew I was different. That became very, very obvious. It became extremely obvious when from the age of like 7, I had beings from other dimensions coming in and taking me through portals into inner earth and training me and doing all sorts of things that, forget even trying to explain to a psychologist, they warned me not to. I was told, don't even go there. This is between us. You will understand someday. And progressively, we worked with it. But I am so relieved. I finally understand what I am because I understood the stuff about the DNA and the levels and dimensions. The indigos are coming, and it's a real relief to me because I'm not alone. Yeah, and neither are the people. There may be indigos sitting here right now that you don't know you're an indigo yet either. I didn't know when I first came in. I just knew, boy, was I different. There was something that didn't quite fit here, and I progressively had experiences that took me further and further into paranormal land, extraordinary experience. And I couldn't understand for a long time why. There may be people here that by finding this information, you have a new framework now. You might be saying, do I fit into that? Maybe I do. Gosh, maybe I'm an indigo. And when you start to realize what that means in terms of identity, who you are that's coming in here, you start to have some self-respect and start to get your priorities together, because you say, oh, geez, yeah, I'm an indigo. That resonates. Oh, my God, I did come here to do something. I'm starting to remember what I came here to do. I was part of a World Service team. We're here to try to stop pole shift. The indigos are here for huge reasons that our scientists are not even ready to fathom. And we'll talk more about pattern. Now, if you look at each one of those lines, a strand of DNA, which is a primary flash line sequence of scalar waves that hold the consciousness, each one is a frequency of consciousness. Taurinicium, 12-strand humans, could hold 12 dimensions of consciousness in a hominid form and would have full access to transmutational mastery in 4 harmonics, 12 dimensions of consciousness and of dimensional field, which gives them access to, by the way, 12 dimensions worth of time continuum cycles, because time cycles and time continua are all connected to these flash line sequences. We get a linear time progression because of the orientation of the DNA flash line sequences to that of the dimensional bands, and that's a whole other workshop too. So we'll just get into this for a minute. We have what's called the 12-strand diamond sun silicate matrix DNA pattern. That was the Taurinicium design. Before that, there was something called the double diamond sun, 24-strand DNA matrix. What that meant was, you take a Taurinicium and you take its antiparticle double. You take the 12 strands from here and the 12 from there and you put them together and you get something else entirely. It transmutes to a whole different life form that has the ability to hold 24 dimensions of consciousness. It has the ability to hold the memory banks of particle and antiparticle Earth, Terra, and Gaia. It has the ability to be simultaneously aware of itself in the various time vectors, not just one single vector consciousness like we have here. When we're dealing with indigos, we can begin to start understanding that by looking visually at the difference between a 12-strand and here is a 24-strand. Some of the indigos are born with this genetic configuration, and they're not the ones with the highest genetic configuration either. Okay? So I'm trying to show you relationships of things here, dimensions to levels of consciousness, so you can understand what indigos are when they come in. We can do heritage now, honey. Thank you. Okay. Now, we'll get into our heritage. This is the part I'm excited about being able to bring out, simply because we have been denied this information for over 200,000 years on this planet. Most of us don't even think there was anything before the Sumerians appeared spontaneously out of nowhere, from what I hear in the history books. We have a heritage that goes back billions of years, but there is a heritage that goes upward, a vertical heritage, not just a heritage down here in harmonic 1 cycles. But in harmonic 2, there was a race that the harmonic 1s came out of. Our harmonic 2 race was the Tauriniciums, and our 12 tribes down here came out of that. Up in harmonic 3, etheric matter density, there was another race that the Tauriniciums came out of. This is where we start to understand indigos. Okay? We have to begin understanding the whole process by realizing that any hominid life form, or that having a human-like type form, began in harmonic 4, pre-matter liquid light density. In the Lyran star system, if we look up in Lyra, that's actually a location in our morphogenetic, in the universal morphogenetic field, in that area of the morphogenetic field, but on the 4th harmonic. It is a system of liquid light. It's pre-matter before it takes on etheric matter density. It's called the cradle of Lyra. It's also called the Christos. This is where the whole Christ issues come from. It's a level of consciousness, it's a dimensional reality field, a harmonic reality field, that holds the original pattern that the levels of matter density into form were built on. We were all seated through the cradle of Lyra, and all of the races in this time matrix, believe it or not, and this is where the whole concept of coming out of the one begins to make sense, All of the races came through a seed race that took on hominid form. The seed race came out of something before even hominid form, came out of a collective of consciousness, a gestalt of consciousness. And that goes up into the energy matrix levels, the ultra-terrestrial levels of consciousness we talked about that aren't even dimensionalized anymore. Those ascended mastery levels of identity, they're like cosmic families of consciousness that exist in pure scalar wave form. They're not even dimensionalized anymore. They don't experience space-time matter. They're eternal. We're all connected to them. To understand how life forms got into manifestation in the first place, you need to understand they came out of there. Then they dimensionalized into the dimensional structures, broke themselves down, and created shifting in the flashline sequences to create particle bases and the experience of perceivable matter, which is a hologram anyway. In the cradle of Lyra, in our time matrix system, our 15-dimensional system, life was seated there. And it was seated primarily, the hominid forms came out of a cosmic family of consciousness that if you take its vibrational rhythm and translate it into sound in the English language, it comes out to the word Melchizedek. There's things about language we don't understand either. That it's all about vibrational rhythms. And those vibrational rhythms are flashline sequences. And those flashline sequences directly interact with our DNA. Okay? I don't know if I can. I said that so fast, I don't know if I can repeat that one more time. Yeah, can I repeat that? What? What? I'm sorry. Oh, Melchizedek. Okay, that part of it, yes. I can slow that one down and repeat it again. Okay. Okay, Melchizedek is actually a translation of the vibrational pattern of the collective of consciousness, the cosmic family of consciousness that seeded the hominid forms. The flashline sequences, the scalar arrangements, have a sound translation when they're brought down the dimensional scale into light, sound, scalar waves. And when you translate those flashline sequences through the English language flashline sequences, you come out with the sound tones of Melchizedek. And in the Bible, they got as far as identifying King Melchizedek, who came in and did certain things in the biblical history. It goes way beyond that. You know, Melchizedek is a tonal resonance signature for certain aspects of consciousness that link all hominid forms within this 15-dimensional matrix. It's not just a big guy in the sky. It's not a god sitting on the throne that you bow down to. It's completely different than that. Some people interpret Melchizedek as that, Lord Melchizedek. There's certain groups in the New Age movement that call to Lord Melchizedek to assist them. What a Lord Melchizedek is, it's a level of the ascended mastery consciousness of the hominid race that exists beyond dimensionalization. It's a collective of cosmic consciousness that we're all connected to. You can call it Lord if you want to. I don't like the term personally because for our history it has implied subservience and servitude and really getting the not great end of the stick. Okay? You don't have to call anything Lord and Master. All you have to do is recognize you're directly connected to your own inner master, which is your own level of higher dimensional identity, all the way up through the dimensional scale. Now, to understand how we got to where we are, and to where the Indigos fit, where the Turanisium fit, there is a vertical lineage happening here, a vertical progression of flashline sequences, which is a vertical progression of fire letter sequences, which is a vertical progression of DNA code manifestation through the densities down into this one. This is what we need to understand, to begin remembering the truth of our heritage. And in the truth of our heritage, we will begin to understand where the Indigos fit into the picture and why they're so important. Okay, now, we had the Melchizedek tonal signature, cosmic gestalt of identity for the hominid forms in this time matrix, sending portions of itself into the dimensions to create individuation, a form of race, to experience dimensionalized creation and space-time matter and those things that that experience creates. Coming down through harmonic 5, okay, is dimensions 15, 14, and 13. Harmonic 5 we call the Rishi level of identity. If you were to perceive a Rishi, first it'd be flattened because the frequency it transmitted would fry you instantly. It looks like a sun. Their spherical identity. It's beyond the form, that any etheric matter form, any pre-matter form. It is a scalar wave spectra that has the frequencies of a full sphere of energy. Or actually, Rishi has half a sphere, you put two together and you get a whole sphere, 360-degree energy, 360 fire letter sequences. It's all connected. Okay? If we understand the harmonic 5, each of us as individuals has a Rishi collective we're out of, but so does every race. So does every race strain. So does every planet. Everything that comes into matter has this progression of scalar wave patterns that progressively breaks itself down into smaller pieces, and to get back out of here, you have to progressively reassemble those pieces in the order that they were broken down in. That's why so many of us are stuck here in the time matrix. The fire letter sequences, the flash line sequences, the DNA patterns are no longer the same patterns that we came in with, and you have to recalibrate and put together the patterns you came in with to get back out. It's as simple as that. Okay, now, in the cradle of Lyra, the Melchizedek family created several groups of beings. The two primary ones involved with our race were called the Elohai, and that's not the same thing as Elohim. That's different. We'll get to that later. The Elohai and the Seraphai. They were both out of the Melchizedek collective, and they were both the first manifestation of individuation of the Melchizedek Rishi into harmonic 4, pre-matter, liquid light Christos. They were avatar collectives, and they created a liquid light form. We all have a level of this form that we can find too, by the way. The Elohai and the Seraphai and the family lines they created in the lower densities were the core of the whole polarity drama we have been involved with for billions of years before the human imprint was created. The stellar races who came out of those families went into issues of polarity imbalance, which creates conflict between beings. Polarity imbalance is basically a physics thing that comes down to balancing electrical and magnetic polarity frequencies. But when it translates into bodily consciousness and scalar wave beings, it turns into conflicts between DNA patterns, flashline sequences, and if you don't have compatibility in flashline sequences, you don't understand each other. This creates conflict in consciousness. And when you have conflict in consciousness, you tend to have things like wars. People down here in harmonic 1 think that if they think about angels and things up there in the higher harmonics, they think, oh, up in the heavens everything is sweet and hunky-dory and peaceful. Well, I hate to tell you, it doesn't get peaceful until you hit dimension 12. There have been interstellar wars for billions and billions of years trying to work out the polarity imbalances between the descendants of these two primary family avatar collectives, the Elohai and the Seraphai. And we are still in the middle of that major cosmic drama. We are products of that cosmic drama because the Turinicium lineage, human lineage, was created to try to help resolve it and get the flashline sequences back together, because then the harmonious consciousness would come back. We start to understand each other again. Even when they talk about the races were all given different tongues, and then they had to figure out how to reassemble and be able to communicate with each other again. What they're talking about is not just languages. Those languages, again, just like the Melchizedek word, are tonal resonance signatures, which are flashline sequences. They were saying right there, even in the Bible, that we were broken down into separate groups of flashline sequences, and to understand each other and become whole again as a race, we had to put them back together into the original whole out of which all of those pieces came. Okay, now we have Elohai and Seraphai up in harmonic 4. This dimensions 12, 11, and 10. There are other families of consciousness that were involved with seeding other life forms. But the one we need to understand first is the hominid life form, because that's what our consciousness manifested through. Okay? When the avatars of the Elohai and Seraphai began, and they're like creator gods, they knew they had creative power to manifest life forms, and they did. And some of them did, and they mixed this one with that one and that one with this one, and they found that when you mix flashline sequences in the wrong ways, it creates messes in the flashline sequences, which creates messes in the gene codes, which creates a distortion in the codes of ascension, and those beings become trapped in time. And they also go into polarity imbalance and conflict and the whole bit. Many of the Elohai and Seraphai families became what was called fallen, because we hear stories of their fallen angels and all of that. Fallen meant they could no longer expand themselves up and out of matter density because they lost some portion of their original flashline sequences of their design that would allow them to pull their fire letters together and expand back out of the time matrix. The fallen ones also had a fall in consciousness because the codes that were originally part of their makeup that would allow them to pull in the full cognition of the 15-dimensional spectrum in which the law of one is understood, where we understood the whole process that we all came out of one and we're really all one, they lost cognition of that. And they began to see each other as separate and something to fight with. They forgot they were part of each other, and they took different stances. These wars of the heavens came way before the wars on earth, and they still are ongoing. Now, out of those two families, the Melchizedek cloister, all right, which is like the highest level of the Melchizedek signature that retains the full codes of ascension all the way up through the 3 levels of the energy matrix, beyond the 15-dimensional scale, those 3 other levels, the triadic, polaric, and echadic levels. There are other sets of fire letter sequences. They're part of the Melchizedek cloister, collective that holds that sequence as the potential so everything can get back out of time eventually, is called the cloister, the Melchizedek cloister. The Melchizedek cloister cosmic identity collective, knowing it had all these pieces of itself fragmented into the time matrix, holds those codes so they can give those codes back so the pieces of themselves stuck in the time matrix can re-evolve back into expansion, into being part of that cosmic family of consciousness. Now, the Elohai families of these two families were commissioned by the Melchizedek cloister collective to be in the time matrix, to be the one race line that would hold the original codes of ascension, the original full fire letter sequences out of which all of the races came out of. There was one original Lyran Christed pattern, one avatar pattern hominid form that had all of the flashline sequences that then were broken down into make different race strains. The Elohai family were appointed as the ones who would retain within their manifestations the coding that would allow all of the others to plug in and get their codes back so they could get out of time. The group of the Elohai family that was commissioned to do this was called the Emerald Order of the Azurite Council. This is where we get Azurite Temple. Okay? The Emerald Order is an ancient group of beings. So far ancient it loses its meaning in our context of time. But they were basically a group of the Elohai family avatars that agreed to stay in the time matrix, even though they could have expanded back out into ascension. They agreed to stay here to assist all of the stellar races back into evolving into the ascension codes as they are held within the Melchizedek cloister, which means it gave the potential, or kept the potential, of every being down in here being able to become an ascended master again. We all started as ascended masters. Before we started as Turanicium, way up there, that's where we all started as. It's not a potential we have to get, it's a potential we have to remember how to expand back into, because it's always been there. Okay, so the Emerald Order of the Azurite Council was a group of beings out of the Elohai family. They were avatar collectives in harmonic 4, pre-matter, liquid, light. Okay. The Emerald Order seeded down in the next harmonic a version of itself, and they kept doing this all the way down. So those codes would be represented in all of the harmonics, making them available to the gene pools in all of the race strains going down. Now the Emerald Order Elohai seeded in harmonic 3 etheric matter a race called the Anahazi. Not Anunnaki. Anahazi, okay? The Anahazi races, also known as Syrian whites, because that's what they look like if you see them. They look like white beings with the big slanted eyes and that kind of thing. They are an etheric race, etheric matter density, which looks kind of ghost-like to us if we see them. The Anahazi were commissioned by the Emerald Order above them to become representatives of the Emerald Order in that level of etheric matter density. The Anahazi represents the first etheric matter hominid imprint that all hominids in the whole 15-dimensional scale from harmonic 3 and below fit into. To re-evolve back out of time, every being will have to re-evolve back through that imprint to go back into liquid light Christos, and then back into Rishi, and then back into expansion into ascended mastery. There is one pattern, one hominid pattern, that all hominids emerged out of. There's much diversity after that point. But the Anahazi in harmonic 3 were appointed the guardians of holding the codes of that pattern together so it would always remain as a potential for any race, no matter how far they rest, because that's what they look like if you see them. They look like white beings with the big slanted eyes and that kind of thing. They are an etheric race, etheric matter density, which looks kind of ghost-like to us if we see them. The Anahazi were commissioned by the Emerald Order above them to become representatives of the Emerald Order in that level of etheric matter density. The Anahazi represents the first etheric matter hominid imprint that all hominids in the whole 15-dimensional scale from harmonic 3 and below fit into. To re-evolve back out of time, every being will have to re-evolve back through that imprint to go back into liquid light Christos, and then back into Rishi, and then back into expansion into ascended mastery. There is one pattern, one hominid pattern, that all hominids emerged out of. There's much diversity after that point. But the Anahazi in harmonic 3 were appointed the guardians of holding the codes of that pattern together so it would always remain as a potential for any race, no matter how far digressed it got and how far the codes and flashline sequences got messed up. So you have the Anahazi in harmonic 3. In harmonic 4, we have the Emerald Order of the Azurite Council. Now, the Azurite Council part comes from the ultra-terrestrial collective. You have the Melchizedek cloister, and that has numerous families within the non-dimensionalized levels of the energy matrix, ultra-terrestrial families. The Azurite Council is the primary head family in the Melchizedek cloister organization. They kind of direct what happens in the time matrix here. So the Azurite Council is, they're ascended masters, ultra-terrestrial collectives of cosmic consciousness, if you want to look at it that way. So we have up in ascended mastery levels, Melchizedek cloister. Then we have the Azurite Council, which creates the Emerald Order, of the Elohai, which creates the Anahazi. The Anahazi were originally seeded into what we look up in the sky and see as the Lyran system, but in harmonic 3, etheric matter density. Because the other groups of the Elohai families and Seraphai families that were also creating things in the lower harmonics began to create things that were at war with the things that held the light codes and were trying to destroy them. There were battles that happened in the harmonic 3 etheric matter density of the Lyran system. And the original planet that was supposed to be the planet that went with Earth, Gaia, Terra, Earth, all of that lineup, was actually destroyed. The morphogenetic template for this planetary system was blown apart, and this planetary system was plugged into something else, but it wasn't its original flashline pattern, its original scalar pattern. The Anahazi race from Lyra and harmonic 3 had originally been inhabitants of that etheric planet. Now we have Gaia as etheric Earth. Gaia became something different because of what happened one harmonic above with the avatars. We had a pattern. Our Maharic shield of the planet was called Aramatana. Okay? The Anahazi and the Emerald Order were the guardians of Aramatana, the planetary flashline sequences, not just the hominid flashline sequences. In harmonic 4, that pattern was literally blown up. What that translated down to in harmonic 3 was the races of Lyra, the Anahazi races, fled. There was a group of them that kept the Emerald Order coding that was moved to a different part of the morphogenetic structure of the harmonic 3 universe, which corresponds to our Sirius star system. So they began as Lyran, and then they became Sirian. So the Anahazi, which is the original race imprint for all the hominids, that carries the full ascension codes for not just us, but everything else in this time matrix in hominid form, are considered Lyran, Sirian, Anahazi, the Sirian whites. They seeded the Azurite races, which some people who are doing contact, ET contact and stuff, they know this, the blues. There's a blue race. It's shown in the mythologies of Hindu literature. It's shown in Egyptian literature. Blue people. Yes, there were blue people. They were created in the next harmonic down by the Anahazi. We had Anahazi in harmonic 3, right? Harmonic 2 in the Sirius star system. The Anahazi created the Azurite race, the Sirian blues. This is our lineage. This is our stellar lineage before we became human. The patterns we had to pass through just to get into a human imprint. Okay, so we will all, in our higher levels, have what at this point is future time incarnations that are in each of these race streams. Okay, now I have to take this piece by piece because I can really confuse you if I don't try. Okay, the Lyran, Sirian, Emerald Order, Anahazi, and Azurite genetic imprint. That chain of identity that I just explained coming down, race identity, was the seed into which 12 other intergalactic mutated families were spliced into to form the Turanicium imprint that was the original human form. It was the seed coming down from Emerald Order, or Melchizedek, down through Azurite Council, through Emerald Order Elohai, into Anahazi, into Azurite Syrian Blue Race, finally into the Turanicium race, and then the Turanicium race into the 12 tribes that became the human race. This is our stellar heritage. These are the genetic, the scalar wave, the flash line sequences we need to reaccrete into our DNA in order to get ourselves into full expansion out of the time matrix. Right now we just got to worry about getting the gene code started enough to get through the changes that are going to be happening in the next 12 years. Okay? But that is the progression. And it's the first time this has not been convoluted, because for thousands of years some of the races from Harmonic 2 would come in and make themselves look like creator gods, like the Elohim, which are different than the Elohai. Okay, you want to put up the next one? We'll get into this because this is causing lots of confusion these days. There are Elohim communicating with channels from here across the oceans and to England and all other countries. They're starting to talk to their family down here. They're starting to talk to the humans, and what many of the Elohim are saying is, "We created you. Just listen to us and we'll teach you how to be good humans." They're not teaching you ascension. They're not teaching you about flashline sequences, DNA, and how to get your codes back. They're teaching you, we're your parents. Listen to us. You have to ask yourself, why? Why? If they know, and if they're up there, they already know this stuff, why are they not teaching what the Azarites are teaching, which is the mechanics of how it works, so you can put it together and become independent and grow up to be just like them, because they don't want you to grow up to be just like them. They're parents that are a little nervous that the kids might grow up and be more than they are, and they don't trust us totally. The Elohim, here's where they came from. We had, entering in Harmonic 4, we'll start with, the Elohai Emerald Order families, okay? They had a 30 to 48 strand, what's called an Emerald Sun DNA configuration. Remember, the 12 strand was a Diamond Sun configuration? Well, this is called the Emerald Sun DNA configuration. 30 to 48 strands, 30 to 48 flashline sequences that would allow not only the 15 dimensions of consciousness here to be assimilated, not only that plus its other 15 on the other side, giving you the 30 from the antiparticle universe, but also the 18 codes and their reverse from the 3 levels of the energy matrix. The Elohai Emerald Order carried the ability to embody what's called, or to have access while embodiment, to what is called the Eckhart identity level, which is Ascended Master Level 3. Okay? Understanding this is important as we get talking more about who indigos are. All right, now, here's where Elohim pop up. When we had the Elohai races in Harmonic 4, remember I said how some of the races of the Elohai family and the Seraphai families digressed and created race lines that had their flashline sequences off, that they were stuck in time because they didn't have the connections anymore that would allow them to plug in all those frequencies to expand. Now, the fallen Elohim, they were Elohai once in Harmonic 4. They severed certain connections and reduced themselves to only 11 flashline sequences in order to get out from under the control of their Rishi identities in Harmonic 5. It was like a rebellion. We don't want to listen to you anymore. We don't want to do the law of one. We're having too much fun convoluting ourselves to the point where we don't make any sense to ourselves anymore. They decided that they were going to be creator gods without God, without that whole collective of consciousness. That any being that really reaches ascended mastery knows you can't divide it up in parts and expect that to work for very long. You have to recognize we are all one and all individual at the same time. And with the code convolution, or getting distorted flashline sequences in their consciousness and twists in their consciousness in the way they looked at things, the part of the Elohai family that decided to rebel against working with the higher councils, they became the Elohim. Some of them have evolved since then and rejoined the Elohai families. Now, these beings are awesome. If you see these beings, you get your D4 vision turned on and they come down to visit you, they are gorgeous. They are these white, you can't even describe them. They're like living light energy forms with sort of not quite human features and large eyes when they want to show you that much detail. They carry a presence with them that is awesome, and it just makes your heartstrings sing. You just feel, mama, you know? Your body, whether you're dealing with an Elohai or an Elohim, when that comes into your frequency, one of those consciousness, your body cells cry out, mama, because it feels the flashline sequence identification, even if it's not complete. So humans here can be so seduced by Elohim, who don't have their act together completely either, simply because of that biological identification of consciousness. And that's what's happening here. There are lots of Elohim channels at this point. Those people don't know if they're dealing with Elohim that are trying to help them re-evolve, or that are trying to trap them into another loop of evolution that, like we've been in for the last 22,000 years, actually. There's been things that happened because of the Elohim family lines that mutated our race down here worse than it ever had to be. We need to make the distinction between Elohai, meaning higher, and Elohim. And over here, in the Seraphai families, some people are bringing out information that, the Seraphim are all the bad guys. Then it kind of gets put over into the Seraphai family lines. Not all Seraphai family lines are negatively oriented. Only some of them are. Just like with the Elohai family lines, we had the Seraphai. Now, they were able to hold, they had something called the gold sun matrix, DNA matrix. It could hold 24 to 30 strands, flash line sequences, levels of consciousness. They were seeded primarily into the Arcturus and Andromeda galaxies in harmonic 4. And they created their own race lines, which became involved with ours later. Then there was a group of them, and this is ones we're having big problems with these days. Okay, they're back. All right, the Seraphim, that again, just like the Elohim over there, decided we're going to run our own universe, don't want to cooperate with the higher guys anymore, created their own race strains. They unplugged their flashline sequences to get out from under the impulsing coming from their higher parts and reduced themselves to a 10-strand pattern, but at least they could rule in 10 dimensions of reality. When a being or a group of beings cuts off part of their flashline sequences, there's a little catch-22. They become finite unless they feed off other things. If you have your flashline sequences hooked up through the 15 dimensions and into the energy matrix, you have a perpetual supply of energy and consciousness moving through you. You are an eternal being. It's just continually recycling, changing form. You don't go away or disintegrate or reduce yourself into space dust for something else to use as creative fuel. When you sever the strands, you become a finite being that has to take energy from something else in order to self-sustain. That's what this group of Seraphim did. Now, these are in harmonic 4. These are avatars. They're liquid light, dark avatars. They created race strains down the harmonics, just like the good Seraphim, or Seraphai did, just like the convoluted Elohim did. And these guys aren't quite as messed up as these guys. Okay, the Seraphim are the ones that created the real big nasties, as we call them. The Elohim are like in between the two. And the Elohai are the ones who still retain the codes of ascension for the races. What the Seraphim created in the next harmonic first was one of the major things that have given us problems here. They were in the Orion star system, etheric matter density, and they were winged Dracon. They look like dragons with wings and tails. Like a lot of our devil mythology comes from a cellular imprint of understanding that race, because once upon a time they interacted here and they forcefully crossbred with humans to create a hybrid strain called the Dracos, which is actually focused in Nibiru right now and is starting to mess with this race again. They're back, and it's serious business. They have 10-strand, what's called the Black Sun DNA matrix. It's called the Black Sun because in order to have that independence that they created, they not only unplugged everything above 10 strands, they reversed the order of the 5-letter sequences in the rest. They completely turn the consciousness inside out. They do not have the ability to plug into the rest of the dimensional scale, which gives them a consciousness that cannot cognate anything but itself and its own needs. If you ever looked in a shark's eyes, like on pictures and on TV, there's this blank stare there. These guys are eating machines, okay? You can go up to a shark and say, I'm a really special being and it's really not a good idea to eat me. Do you think it's going to care? It has no cognition level to have compassion or to think about you in that form. You are just fuel that it is biologically driven to consume. This is the level of consciousness, but amplified by 11 or 10 dimensions that you're dealing with the draconian matrix. It's an avatar matrix of liquid light beings that are majorly screwed up. Okay, I'll put it in very loose slang down here. Very twisted consciousness. They need more help than anybody in the time matrix. They are so stuck here that they have had to turn themselves into the epitome of evil just to self-sustain. where they will suck energy off anything they can get their claws into or their flash line sequences hooked into, just to self-sustain themselves. At some point when we evolve, and the ones that are in higher evolution are trying to help these guys to get their coding back. Because if they get their flashline sequences back, they start to get more and more of that energy supply coming from source. But they're still in such a twisted frame of consciousness that they're afraid of the higher light. They're afraid of connecting with their rishi. And in their fear, just to survive, they have to consume. So it's like a very ancient drama that's still going on today. When we get down into what they created a reptilian version of Anunnaki. But they didn't create the first Anunnaki. This is where you get over here. Back over to the Elohai families. Remember, the Elohai families in the next harmonic down, harmonic 3, created various things. One of the first things in the hominid forms they created was the Lyran Syrian Anahazi. They were the ones that held the codes of ascension. I'll just refer to those flashline sequences, the right DNA patterns that get you all the way up as the codes of ascension, because that's what it's all about here. Evolution is about restructuring the codes of ascension so you get full mastery over manifesting and demanifesting wherever you want in the 15-dimensional time matrix and the energy matrix beyond it. Okay, so we have the Anahazi in harmonic 3. At the same time, down in harmonic 3, the digressive Elohim family, who didn't have any more than 11 flashline sequences anymore, created a version of itself in harmonic 3 called the Anu. This is where we get the stories that are popping up these days in the ancient histories about the Anu races. And there's a lot of mythology from the Syrian star system primarily involved with Anu, and Anu was a god and all these kind of things. Anu was a race of beings created by fallen Elohim. It's like, let's get it straight already. Before these guys that are channeling stuff, telling us that Anu were the ancient gods, bow down to these guys, don't do this. These are Elohim families. Elohim, we can love Elohim, but we can say, excuse me, there is something higher. And if you aren't teaching me about ascension directly, you're withholding something from me that you know about, and that means you have an agenda here. What is your agenda? We need to start interacting intelligently with what's happening here, because we're having contact. Now, here's where we'll get to understand where indigos come in. Okay, not so much over here right now. We have the Anu in harmonic 3 out of the Elohim. We have in the good guy Saras families, the Seraphite families, the Saras and the Saras, which later crossed with the Syrian blues and got involved with our Egyptian lines to recalibrate the gene code in our race to some degree. They're trying to help us. Now here, there are several race strains created in different reality systems. Like when we have Palladians talking to us through channels and that kind of stuff now. They're not just Palladians. It's like Earthians. There's a lot of different people here. When you're talking to Palladians, are you talking to the good ones? Are you talking to the draconian ones? Which ones are you talking to? We need to be able to ask these questions. Okay. When the harmonic 3 Anahazi came down and created their versions of races down here, they created the Azarites, the blue race. We ended up with this family line here through the Hibernians creating Anunnaki. We took Hibernians, we combined them with some of the draconian matrices over there, and we ended up with the Dracos Anunnaki here. We ended up with, there's actually an Anunnaki strain that came in with these, which was a little different than the basic Anu pattern. But when you deal with Anu instead of Anahazi, Anus are the ones that became the Anunnaki lines, that became very twisted up with the dark sun, black sun matrices. And it's not that one group of consciousness is good, one is bad. It's that one has its ascension codes and its ability to cognate the law of one and to therefore act humanely and lovingly, and the other has lost the ability to do that. And you don't lay yourself down before them and say, well, because you're higher evolution, go ahead, lead me. Because remember sharks. Sharks don't think about their food. They just eat it. Okay? We are energy systems down here. And the ones from higher evolution that are messed up perceive us like sharks perceive food. That's all. They don't realize we have something else besides that to offer. They don't care. We need to understand these things and what's going on, because it's affecting the Indigo drama right now. It's also affected our ancient stellar history forever and ever. When we come down in harmonic 2, our race strain goes into the Syrian and Palladians. They were seated in both the harmonic 2 Syrian and Palladian race, planetary systems. The Azarites, which were the blue hominid that came out of the Anahazi, white, Syrian whites. Okay, then there was various race strains that came down here. Out of there, when we get down to about here, this was the Emerald Order. They're called Orifim. this is where the experiment was done, to try to take the coding, the primary coding of all the other interstellar races, put it into the basic Emerald Order imprint to create a new hominid line that the consciousness that was stuck in the other forms could build up codes enough to evolve into. So it could evolve out of the time matrix through what would become the human pattern. The first level of the human pattern started in harmonic 2 with the Emerald Order Orifeme. And Or refers to light. These were good guys. They had 30 to 48 strand capacity, that Emerald Sun matrix. Then they created a little smaller version of themselves in harmonic 2 still, plain old Orifeme. Okay? They had 24 to 30 strand capacity. Yeah, reduced it a little bit. Into the Orifeme were seeded the Turinicium, which were the 12 imprints from the other stellar races, and it created the full Turinicium 1 race. That's where it became Turinicium. Orifeme became Turinicium and human by adding the other patterns of the 12 races that needed help in their evolution. So we have the Turiniciums created now. Out of those came two primary divisions, and this is the story is told in the Secrets of Amente book a bit, where again the Anunnaki ones from over here and from over there, the middle guys and the really bad guys, interbred with some of the Turinicium, interbred with some of the Orifeme, which means you create some really high-coded, nasty beings. There's a lot of heavy artillery created in the negative side by combining some of these very high-coded races with the distorted races. Like the Azrael, they were actually avian, getting the wing things from the Seraphi lines. They were blue, and they became with the dark angels in our history. They were the real negative dark angels that have messed with us for a very long time. So I showed some extra stuff that I don't have to cover here today on these charts, just so you see where some of the pieces fit. So if you hear somebody channeling Palladians, put up your Maharic seal, that pillar of light, before you go in, just in case they're transmitting frequencies that you don't want in your flashline sequences. Okay, now we get down here again. Orifeme came from Emerald Order, Orifeme, Turinicium. Turiniciums got messed up with the Anunnaki coding and became two races. They split into one that went into a reptilian type of human called the Bellicudium, and another that was a purified version, bringing the codes back to what the Orifeme were supposed to be, which is called the Adami Kudman. That was the pattern used, the Adami races. This is where stories of Adam come from. The Adami races were created. They were restructuring the imprint again and seeding it in 12 small pieces down here in harmonic 1. So the imprint could re-evolve down here, then we'd evolve back into the Adami Kudman, then we'd evolve into the Turinicium, then into the Orifeme, Emerald Order Orifeme. We progress all the way up to get our ascension codes back. When we understand this progression here, we can begin to understand where indigo children fit. Okay. We have indigo children here. These are a hybrid experiment that's taking place once again, because we have the higher ones of higher evolution realizing that right now we have some of these guys and those guys coming in here trying to hijack evolution. They're doing hybridization programs. Some of the UFO abduction stuff are by the negative groups, and they are trying to create hybrid versions of themselves to take over this place. Because they have the ability to do that if they want to. If there was no intervention, the human race on this planet would be hijacked again, completely out of its 12-strand capacity, forget its higher strand capacity. So there are arrangements being made where some of the negative sides are deciding they don't want to be so negative after all, and they're asking for help from some of the lighter sides. So there's negotiations being made all up and down the interdimensional scale. This is when the angels choose what side they're on, And it's coming down to hybridization programs running by each agenda here. We have the Elohim running their particular agenda, which is more interested in helping the Anunnaki races, since they were their Anu races, than helping the human race by itself. They don't want to hurt the human race. They're just willing to take the human and combine it with Anunnaki, realizing that the Anunnaki code is so strong that it will override the 12-strand. The Anunnaki will pick up the missing 12-strand and get its code, but it will unravel the human gene code back to a 10. It's not an evolutionary experiment that's in our best interest. It's in the Anunnaki best interest, but at our expense. That's why it's not endorsed by the Azurite Council or the Emerald Order. It is supposed to be win-win for everybody. In the law of one, there are win-win solutions that everybody can get what they need from. This matrix is not cooperating with that. Some of them are going to be coming over on this side the more weird things get between now and 2012 when it all comes to a head. Over there, they just want to take over the planet because they want the stargates that are at the center of this planet. They don't care what they have to do to the race here. They want one world order control. They're trying to do mind control here. And they're trying to hybridize a version of themselves here that can take over the planet. That's their only concern of the human lineage. It has codes that are compatible with the atmospheric conditions on Earth. They're trying to get that higher coding to bring in their higher levels of consciousness into form here so they can become the dominant force of this planet. Then we have these guys, the good guys over here, saying, you know, these guys don't stand a chance if we don't intervene. And they have intervened. That intervention is the Indigo children. The Indigo children are hybridized gene code that, that involve the full coding that goes up. They're not just Adami imprint humans. They're not just Turinicium with the 12th strand. Some of them are Orifeme with 24 to 30 strand capacity. Some of them are Emerald Order. The Indigos returning. The Indigos coming into this race cycle where they normally would not belong, and the only reason they're being put here is because we're in big trouble if they don't come. This race will never again be able to reach its 12th strand if this evolutionary experiment isn't done now to give us back a real jump start in the gene code. You're not dealing with Turinicium souls incarnating here. You're dealing with Orifeme and Emerald Order souls incarnating here. What they are Elohai from Harmonic 4. These are avatars that are connected directly to their ascended master levels of consciousness. Some of them are Ekars.